Hi, everyone, and thanks for checking in with us at Funeral Innovations Trends, Tips, and Technology, where we chat with leaders in the profession to discuss marketing trends, business tips, and technology innovation. Plus, we talk about how digital marketing helps you better serve your families. I'm Heather Musieski. I am the marketing director here at Funeral Innovations.
And I'm Joey Haas. I'm the marketing and design coordinator at Funeral Innovations.
And today we have Jason Troyer with us. He is a grief specialist and a grief speaker. Thanks so much for being with us, Jason. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. To start us off, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. I'm originally an Iowa boy. I met my wife in Kansas at the University of Kansas, and now I'm in East Tennessee, near Knoxville, Tennessee. I am trained as a psychologist. I'm a counseling psychologist by training and have been a therapist in the past. But most of my career, I was actually a college professor of psychology and taught counseling to undergrads and things like that. But grief has always been my area of specialty. It's what I did my dissertation on. I've written a book about counseling widowers and a few things like that. And I did the typical academic research stuff for quite a few years as part of being a professor. And quite honestly, it's great that there's people out there that do research on grief, but I got a little burned out on spending a year doing a study and then presenting it to 15 people and then having nobody read the research article. And so I just got to the point where I was really looking to do more practical things that would help grief people. And by happenstance, at that point, I actually got connected with a local funeral home owner. His wife was a professor at the college I taught at. And I just said to him, I wish I could do more to help bereaved people. And he's like, of course, we have bereaved people walk through our door every day, and I'd love more tools and resources to help them. So that kind of started me on my journey of helping funeral professionals probably around 8 or 10 years ago. Since then, so I started off more kind of creating grief support materials. I was looking at some of the resources that funeral homes and funeral professionals were using at the time. Some of it was really good, and some of it was really, really outdated. And so I created a series of booklets I call the Finding Hope series. And then I'm a big believer that I think funeral professionals are certainly highly trained professionals. And one thing that they have that can really differentiate themselves from other funeral homes, but also from, I think, some outside forces that are trying to kind of jump into the funeral space, like hotel, like management services and hotels who have like meeting rooms and ballrooms and things like that, is if they can demonstrate that they have some knowledge of grief and loss. Not expecting them to be grief counselors, but so I do some trainings to help them kind of get up to speed. Some things that if they've been out of mortuary science school for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, advances in grief that are practical that can help them serve families, but not take over their entire working time, because they've got enough on their plate as it is. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I've created a couple of various things, and then just looking for ways to help make grief support easier for funeral homes to provide, and also making sure that is based on really accurate modern grief information and research.
Gotcha. And so one of the things that you talk about on your website and a few of your resources and stuff, is that there are 3 parts to the grief process: healing, remembering, and rebuilding. Can you talk a little bit more about what those mean, and how can funeral directors help during those stages?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of my online program called Grief Plan. And so I think healing is really about, and the first thing I should say, because it's always kind of a misconception within grief, I'm not a big 5 stages of grief fan. I'm a Kubler-Ross fan, but I'm not a 5 stages of grief fan. So these are not 3 stages. These will certainly overlap with each other, but certainly healing is dealing with all of the pain of loss and the other emotions that come with the initial loss. And so that can include certainly sadness and grief, certainly sometimes anger, sometimes relief in terms of a caregiving situation, or maybe a difficult relationship between the survivor and the deceased person, those sorts of things. And so that certainly is a lifelong process. That certainly oftentimes is most intense at the beginning, but just certainly recognizing the variety of grief related emotions and thoughts and feelings, not just sadness or those other things. Remembering is more focusing on the ongoing connection with the deceased person. And this is getting into a newer concept we call continuing bonds. And while rarely it can be unhealthy, most of the time this is a very healthy kind of ongoing relationship. And so looking at what we can do to really support the idea that it's normal and healthy to have these ongoing connections. And so, easy practical examples. I help some funeral homes with this, certainly remembrance services of various types, I think is an important thing. Just simply, whether it's posting in your materials, you talking about it, your social media, just acknowledging that ongoing connections are healthy and normal. If you keep mementos and keepsakes, if you review, tell stories, if you keep photo albums, or these days kind of, video montages or things like that, those are all normal and healthy things. Is it possible to take it too far? Yes, but 99% of the time, that's usually within a healthy range there. And then the rebuilding process is dealing with those practical challenges after a loss. And that is everything from, relearning or learning new skills that you need to kind of fill the space that the decedent maybe took upon their shoulders when they were alive. Also kind of how do you kind of live with grief and kind of, I really do see grieving as a lifelong process. It's not a, when is grieving over? It's like, maybe when it's less intense than it was, but it's really much more of a lifelong process. So what are the practical skills and practical things we need to do to really kind of live the rest of our life with that loss?
Very nice.
Yes, I love all those answers. And it really gives us a new way to frame kind of the different ways that people can be in their grief journey. I love the remembering one. My grandmother died a number of years ago, but I have a cardinal mug that I bring out every Christmas between like November and until the holidays are over. And it's my grandma's mug. I always just call it that. And it's just bringing her into my holiday festival. Love it.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. And these, there's so many holiday reminders, and for some families, Christmas ornaments that might be 20, 40, 60 years old, or other decorations, or whatever that person's faith tradition, that they might have those kind of sacred, these ordinary objects are absolutely imbued with kind of sacred remembrances and reminders, those sorts of things. Absolutely.
Totally. So COVID has changed tons of stuff for everyone. I think it's given everybody a kind of unique perspective on loss. And I'm wondering, do you think that coping with grief has changed since the pandemic, or has it been complicated, or what do you think is different for people?
Yeah, I do think it has complicated things. I think it has created some major changes. Probably not a big surprise. I am a huge fan of how funeral homes can help families begin the grieving process, and how valuable funeral rituals can be. And so, unfortunately, we've lost so much in terms of the inability to have, every funeral home professional that I know of wants to throw the doors open wide, invite as many people as possible. They see firsthand on a day-to-day basis the power of, whether you call it a visitation or a wake or whatever, the sharing of stories, the sharing of support. And so, unfortunately, because we've been so limited in that, it has taken a toll. Some people have been able to adjust pretty well. I know some people really find support in a very specific, online support group where they reach out through technology, and some feel very supported that way before the pandemic, and certainly maybe even more so now that it's here. But some folks there's just an absence of support, and not being able to travel, not being able to get together, loss of that physical contact and the hugs and appreciation and the delivering of meals that we normally would have, those sorts of things. I think it's really taken a toll, and I'm concerned about it, quite frankly. I'm concerned about just various ways to, balancing being safe about the pandemic, but also reaching out and really comforting people and connecting with people the way we would normally want to. So I think it's been great that funeral homes have embraced, the virtual services, those sorts of things. Anything funeral homes can do to reach out. I've talked about the example of, maybe you have someone on your staff who is immunocompromised or something like that, and they want to be around people as little as possible. maybe turning them into your kind of virtual/remote assistance person, and just say, we're going to send you everything we've got in the storeroom in terms of grief materials, or we're going to send you a handwritten note or a handwritten card every month for the first few months. And that person's job is now kind of support, and they can still contribute and follow up with families and do those sorts of things. Or maybe it is an email, maybe it's a quick phone call. And again, we're not asking you to fulfill the role of grief counselor. We're asking you to be empathetic and maybe be a good listener for a while, or those sorts of things. So there's some things we can do, but I am concerned about it. I'm certainly, for lots of reasons, excited about us getting back to normal as quick as possible, but I think grief is a big part of that.
So kind of following up on that, I'm curious, do you think that technology will ever be able to evolve to kind of fill those gaps of, like, do you think that there will ever be a chance that, using technology in alternative ways to grieve and honor a loved one will ever be able to, like, replace the in-person, all that stuff? Or do you think that those kinds of things will always be necessary?
It's a great question. And I tend to think about it in terms of technology can provide certain fantastic advantages that in-person would never be able to do. And yet there's also some unique things about in-person sorts of stuff. Earlier we were talking about that healing, remembering, rebuilding model, and that's what I use in my grief plan program. And so that's an entirely online-based grief program that is self-directed. So it's not interactive at all. It's not forums necessarily. It's not online interaction, but it is people going through about 60 of my videos, kind of these short, quick videos. Now, during times of COVID, it's been more popular because people can do it entirely safely, entirely remotely, and it has a few other benefits. Like if people want to go through, if they're awake at 2 a.m, there's probably no grief support group in the world that's going to be running then. So they can jump on, they can, almost kind of binge through 10 or 15 videos if they want to, come back and rewatch stuff. And so it has those advantages like other online resources. And an online forum that, you might be chatting back and forth with somebody in Australia at 2 a.m, when you would have to wait another week or another month for your in-person grief support meeting. On the other hand, if you've made a really close connection with an in-person grief support or an in-person counselor, hard to beat that type of kind of the feeling in the room, the connection, those sorts of things. It's tough to beat that. So I maybe I'm taking the politician's way out here, but I see fantastic advantages for remote online sorts of things. And yet there still is always power. As a former counselor who's in the room with clients, there's a unique power in that kind of a person-to-person sort of situation. And as well, there's unique power in, it's great that your aunt in California can now view the Florida funeral service and not have to get on a plane that she might have missed before. But it's hard to replace kind of being in the room, maybe smelling the scented candles, in a normal time, kind of getting the hugs that you might in a receiving line, those sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was really well said. Both are needed.
Yeah, and I think along those same lines, in your experience counseling people in grief, would you say that those folks who missed an in-person service during the pandemic might really want to consider having one when we have fewer restrictions?
I think so. And I recognize in that it might look very different. It may not feel, it won't feel quite the same. It won't feel, because in terms of the time between the loss and then when the service would be and a few other things. And maybe even situations where people almost kind of have it may sound strange to say it, but almost kind of their own personal service of one. It's like, I'm going to take this afternoon or this, Saturday morning, and I'm going to visit a place that I can be by myself and be quiet and be introspective. And maybe that's going through pictures on my phone or a photo album, or spending some time lighting a candle or with a religious book of my faith tradition or those sorts of things. It might look really different, and it might look like, it might be finally having the family reunion, and it's like, we're going to take 10 minutes out and we're going to remember folks, or we're going to have Uncle Bob's, favorite barbecue, or he loved Dr. Pepper, and so we're going to have a Dr. Pepper for Uncle Bob, and sorry we couldn't be there at the funeral last year, those sorts of things. So I encourage people to kind of get creative about that. And I think it does, especially in those situations, a lot of people are thinking already. So let's just, kind of bring the elephant out and kind of talk about what's missing and those sorts of things.
Hmm. Very nice. So, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but so the holidays can be difficult for, anybody suffering loss. And especially this year, loss has been on everybody's mind. And so what can help get people through the holiday season? And, we touched on remembrance services a little bit, but how can funeral professionals help facilitate this? And, what do you think their role is?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in simply kind of putting it out there, whether that is the remembrance services, their social media, their website, other things like that, and just simply acknowledging that people are thinking about it and people are having a difficult time. And I think that's true during the holidays. I think that's true year round. I often give the example, if someone had a close relationship with their mother and Mother's Day is coming up, their radar is kind of out there looking for, are other people feeling the way I am? Is what I'm feeling normal? Those sorts of things. And you can make a connection in those moments. Like, this is normal. Here's some ways other people are remembering their mom during this month, these couple of days, those sorts of things. And that's certainly true for the holidays as well. Just showing examples and not shying away from it. Funeral professionals, certainly being surrounded by grief and bereaved people are normally pretty open to doing that. A lot of other businesses and other areas, may shy away from that because they might think it's sad, when I think that's really an opportunity for them to connect. Grief is a normal response. Almost every adult I know has suffered some significant loss in one way or another. And so, it's just a good way to kind of get the connection going, to kind of just bring it out there and be open with it. In terms of the individual, I always encourage them to kind of think ahead to specific situations or scenarios that they know might be really difficult. We hear a lot about kind of facing that empty chair around a table, those sorts of things. Or, during normal time, you might have a tradition of going to a faith service or something like that with your loved one, and maybe they're not going to be there this time. So just kind of make a plan for those sorts of things. And all those friends who said, I want to be there for you, take them up on it. It's like, if things are better by Christmas, I'm not sure if they're going to be, but, it's just one example. And you don't normally go to a Christmas Eve service with your spouse and your spouse isn't alive anymore. Asking someone else, I really want to do this. I'm not sure how I'm going to react, but would you come with me? Take up on their offers to help you out. That might be more of a non-COVID situation example, but those types of things can really be helpful.
That's awesome. And I wanted to jump back because I just really loved how you were talking about normalizing feelings. And I think that's really important, that the whole concept of funeral homes helping normalize how people are feeling. And I think that's really valuable. So very well said.
Yeah, thank you.
And shifting gears a little bit, one of the themes I've heard from so many of our funeral directors this year is that it's been a really hard year for them. It's been a lot of change. They've had to work harder than ever. There's been a lot of loss in their communities. It's different loss, especially when people can't be with their loved ones. It seems to make it really difficult for them, as that the first person that the family member might see after the death of their loved one. I think it adds a new layer. Could you talk a little bit about how funeral directors can practice self-care this year? What they need to be doing to be sure that they're staying in a place where they can continue to help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to give a quick shout out. A lot of the work that I've done on burnout prevention for funeral professionals has been part of this thing called the Finding Resilience program. And all funeral professionals know that the career is inherently stressful. We're never going to remove stress from funeral service. And so we really need to be focused on building that resilience throughout the process. And so I've been fortunate to work with Homesteaders Life, and they've got some great resources for anybody over there. I also forgot to mention in my story, I do work half-time. That funeral home owner that I mentioned earlier, I quit being a professor. I do work half-time in a funeral home, and I'm actually at our cemetery right now. And so I get to see firsthand how my colleagues who are more focused on direct work with families are doing. I work with about 100 funeral homes around the country and keep up, I keep tabs on everybody in terms of how they're doing. And what I hear very consistently across the country right now is that funeral professionals feel like they're working at least as hard, if not harder than they were before, but they feel like they've got less to show for it. And what a terribly depressing, situation to be in that would just contribute to burnout, where it's like, we're working as hard as possible, but it's not because we had 300 people come in or 500 people come in for a huge service, but because we have so much to manage and we've got to be so careful about things, they just don't feel like they're being as effective as they are normally. And my first message to them is, what you're doing is absolutely valuable. It may not feel like the way you would normally want to do it, but still, even if it's 5 or 8 family members coming together for a small private service, and that's the best you can do, or that's as big as it can be, that's still really powerful for those folks. And so to not sell themselves short. In terms of what funeral professionals can be doing right now, in terms of, first of all, I guess I always want to focus on the managers and the owners and just remind them the most important thing they can do in terms of helping their staff and colleagues in terms of burnout is just acknowledging that it exists. I do think funeral professionals, there's a little bit of an undercurrent of dismissiveness at times from a small percentage of folks, where they would say, you knew what you were getting into when you signed up to be a funeral professional, and so you just kind of need to deal with it. If that's your attitude as an owner or manager, you're going to have burned out staff, and burned out staff are going to have a tough time empathizing with family members. They're going to provide less quality service. They're going to have more problems outside of the funeral home. That's always going to bleed into funeral service, those sorts of things. And so it really is important for them to, first and foremost, and I point out it's free, just say, burnout is real, and caregiving stress is real, and compassion fatigue is real, and those sorts of things, and be open to talking about it, and try to find resources. NFDA has some great resources as well. And just let people know that it's okay to talk about it, and you talk about some of the challenges that you might have. That's an easy starting point, and it doesn't take more than just kind of acknowledging that it's there and that it's okay to talk about. Now, for funeral professionals, I really focus on trying to incorporate small little things that they can do. It would be nice for us to go for a week-long mindfulness retreat in this beautiful setting. That's not realistic right now, or maybe for a lot of people a lot of the time. So maybe it is, a funeral professional is standing at the back of the chapel, and they know that the service is going to go for another 20 minutes. And so they do a quick check on their phone, and they've got an inspiration of the day app, or maybe an inspirational scripture or something from their faith tradition or something like that. Maybe it is finding 5 minutes to do that mindfulness app. Maybe it's the 5 minutes of journaling, those sorts of things that we need to do. Because funeral service is going to be pulling at you all the time, we need to process that I call refilling. We need to be refilling that all the time. It can't wait until whatever your days off are, I'll say the weekend. It can't wait, can't store it all up and then hope to kind of replenish yourself then. You've got to be refilling yourself all the time. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and what are those signs of burnout that people might look for and check in and be like, am I there? Do I need to do something?
Certainly some of the more typical kind of emotional, physical, and cognitive responses, but specifically in terms of funeral service, looking at it through that lens, if you're having a more difficult time empathizing with family, I often use the, go into your emotional well sort of metaphor. If your well's running pretty dry, pretty consistently, and even if you're doing a good job, but you don't get the satisfaction for doing that good job, those sorts of things are some real key contributors. And certainly some of the emotional stuff. If you're already prone towards or maybe struggle a little bit with things like depression and anxiety, and it's worsening those things, those are going to be some pretty big signs that stress is getting to a point where it's really difficult. Those are some of the things. Certainly overusing substances, sleep problems, some of the problems we would see that would typically come up with depression and anxiety are also going to be right in that same family with both compassion, fatigue, and burnout.
Gotcha. So would you mind talking a little bit more about what services you offer to funeral homes to help them meet the needs of their community, a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, thanks. So I do have printed grief materials, the Finding Hope series. It's a series of about 12 booklets. They're about 28 pages long. And I feel like that is a good point where it is cost effective, and economical for the funeral homes. But it's also more than a trifold brochure where I can't write a trifold brochure on grief. I just, as a professor, as an academic, I've got to get some more information in there. I've got the Finding Hope booklets. I mentioned the Grief Plan online grief program, and so that is something that funeral homes can sponsor for their entire community, and they can have unlimited sign up. It is about 65 videos. What I did is I went back to when I was more of an active grief counselor, and I thought about try to break down all the specific scenarios and questions that people would have for me, or at least the most common ones, and tried to break those down into like about a 5-minute video. And so, and then kind of broke those into the heal, remember, rebuild categories. And so folks can skip stuff that doesn't apply to them, go back and rewatch stuff that does, and have lifetime access to those 65 videos. And then there's also about 50 downloads, journaling prompts, activities, things that they can do on their own. There's some discussion boards and a few things like that. So they can sponsor that entire program, unlimited sign up for their community. And then I also help them kind of publicize that program on social media. I help folks out with social media a little bit. I do trainings. I do classes and community presentations. I'm a speaker for remembrance services and those types of things. And so those are the major categories. If folks are a part of state associations or professional organizations, I do a lot of trainings on a variety of topics, some grief related, some burnout related, some more professional services, business related, those sorts of things.
Cool.
It's all at jasontroyer.com. If folks want to see what I'm doing, it's all there.
Perfect. I just wanted to ask real quick, are those booklets that you mentioned right at the beginning, I'm sorry, I forget, they were the group, Hope?
Finding Hope.
Finding Hope. Those can folks find those online as well, or just printed copies?
Yeah, I do have, if people do go with the printed copies, I also give them, electronic versions of those if they're getting those. I think they are still available on Amazon. I have them kind of, if individual people find them up there, and I do also, for funeral homes that want them, I do customize those booklets. So if folks want those to be branded, I do customize them as well.
Great.
Awesome. We have one last question. We ask this question to everybody, and Joey and I like it because we're both new in this profession, so we've learned so much since we started. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from serving in the funeral profession?
For me, it is, and I always make this distinction, and maybe I focus on it too much, but I always point out that I'm not a licensed funeral professional. I'm a mental health professional, although I do work in a funeral home and cemetery now. And what I was utterly shocked, I'm still continually impressed by, is the breadth of knowledge and service that they provide, things that people have no idea. And to see really effective professionals kind of adjust to so many different situations. Now, on the negative side of that, I talk about how many different hats they have to wear in terms of burnout, and then keeping track of things. And I know you've had other guests on talking about, okay, now it's COVID. Now, if you weren't, live streaming, now you all of a sudden within a month, you've got to figure this out, and new methods of marketing, and staying on top of technology, and then also staying current in your more traditional funeral services and those sorts of things. And I remember the first time I went to some of the national conventions, just kind of looking at the wide array of booths and services to try to help folks out. And so that's where, like Funeral Innovations, I've tried to place myself in a way where, what can I do that takes something off your plate and delivers a really good service to your family, something that you're proud to be associated with, but something that now you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going to take this off your plate and help you out with this. And because you've got the Johnsons coming in at 10 o'clock for an arrangement, and there's a viewing this afternoon at 2, and tonight there's a visitation or a wake service or those sorts of things. So I'm continually impressed by how much they do and how, the breadth of what they have to do and how they handle that so well. It's just amazing, just amazing.
Yeah, I can definitely concur on that. I think since starting my job here, I've realized just how much there is to the job as a funeral director. And yeah, you are so right. There is just a lot more to it than I think people realize. So definitely agree.
Yeah, it's the skill, and then also, you are, not that they're on stage, but they are on stage with that family who's just gone through something likely very traumatic. And so the grace with which you deal with difficult situations, um, you know, I talk about, anger is a part of grief, and sometimes funeral directors get that anger, whether they might not deserve it at all. And so how do you deal with folks who are going through trauma? And we talk about the compassion fatigue and that trauma rubbing off, and being around people in trauma, and how challenging all those things can be. It's amazing to see a really professional, experienced funeral director work different situations with empathy and grace and professionalism. Is just amazing.
Definitely, definitely. So those were all the questions we had. Thank you so much, Jason. We really appreciate your time. And thanks for joining us this week on Funeral Innovations, Trends, Tips, and Technology. So we'll be posting this video on our blog, on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to access it on our Facebook feed. And so feel free to check back in next week because we'll have another show. So keep an eye out. If you have any topics you'd like to see discussed or someone you'd like to hear from in an interview, add it in the comments down below. And if your firm is thinking about planning your own remembrance services, be sure to download our free ebook, which will be linked in the description box below. That's got lots of ideas for planning your own remembrance services this year. And have a great day. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Jason.